The biggest letdown I see here is on the confidence people have on INEC as an entity. And in my own analysis, I believe that it will take INEC an upwards of 10 years to restore the confidence they so flippantly lost in 2023. And that's my own personal analysis, because you have to conduct at least 2 presidential elections to be able to convince the ordinary Nigerians that you are now ready for their
but I mean, it can be incremental.
Yes, so you take it in
So I was on Arise TV yesterday on Charles Aniagolu's Prime Time, where we discussed the upcoming off-cycle elections in Nigeria. We discussed insecurity, confidence in the system, what does it really mean when people vote, and other sundry issues. It was quite an interesting conversation, and I encourage you to take a listen and let me know what you think at the end of the video.
So just a couple of days to go before off-season governorship elections in Imo, Kogi and Bayelsa states, ballots that look set to be closely fought contests in all 3 states. Unsurprisingly, it's already proving controversial, with what appears to be a sharp spike in killings and attacks ahead of the election. The absence of Governor Hope Uzodinma of the APC and the Labour Party governorship candidate Ethan Achonu, as well as the candidates of APGA and the NNPP at the signing of the peace accord in Imo State, has deepened concerns. Meanwhile, rival groups have been loudly demanding the immediate redeployment of the resident electoral commissioner in Imo State, Professor Sylvia Agu, ahead of the poll on Saturday. Both the PDP and the Labour Party said Professor Agu should be removed because she'd allegedly been compromised and could manipulate the election in favour of the APC, but INEC has dismissed the complaints against her as based on suspicion, not facts. And I have to say that the Labour Party have also said that Ethan Achonu is intending to go into the Police Commissioner's office to sign that peace accord. Well, I have 2 guest commentators with me for the rest of the program to offer their perspectives on the news and talking points of the day. Baba Yusuf is a policy strategist, political commentator and group CEO of the Global Investment and Trade Company. He is here, and so too is Chima Christian, who is a public policy analyst. Thank you very much indeed to both of you. Let me start with you, Baba Yusuf.
Thank you.
I'm trying to see if you've got a crystal ball there, because I want to ask you, will the elections count? Will IREV work? Will INEC staff do their jobs? Will the election reflect the will of the people?
Wow, what a way to start this program with me today, Charles. To be honest, it's partly expected because politics is local, so we expect the heat to be higher at this point in time, especially because more so because we have less states to concentrate on. If we go back to the 2023 general elections, we saw how the state governorship elections were more heated than the presidential election. Now it's more so because there are less states for everybody to pay attention to, and the outcomes of the general elections also has set the tone for the kind of disposition and the kind of temperament that is playing out going forward with regards to the confidence on the electoral body, with regards to the confidence on the security, agencies, and of course the posturing and the toxic environment and atmosphere created by the political gladiators, if you like. Expectations are high. So to be honest, it's very difficult to predict what the outcome will be. But I would say that all eyes on INEC, yet again, as the electoral empire, to demonstrate this time around all the issues that were raised, critical and germane, during the 2023 general elections will not reoccur again, because they don't have any excuses to give this time around. They have less states to focus on. They have time to deal with the technology glitches and all that. We also hope that communication strategy going forward will be a better one. We expect more transparency, and we expect total inclusion, going forward. For the political gladiators, you mentioned something at the opening, remark, which is very, very disturbing, that principal players did not go to sign the peace accord. Even though one may argue that is just ceremonial, but then it's symbolic. Also symbolic. It also demonstrates some kind of level of confidence, on that. But that being said, it is what it is. The die is cast. We wait to see the outcomes.
Absolutely. And Chima, as Baba Yusuf was saying, this election clearly a major test for INEC. But what about violence, the threat of which is looming over the ballot? I know you've done quite a bit of work in researching sort of violence, particularly in the southeast. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, where we are in the southeast was foretold, right? And because violence don't just erupt. You have the markers that show you that this is your way to Uganda or your way to Rwanda or any of those two places. And they have always been there, but our political actors did not take it seriously. And today you have that on your hands. As regards whether or not the violence will affect the elections, it will, because those kind of things impact voter confidence. And then when you don't have that confidence that you're going to be protected, then that also shows up in the number of people who are able to turn up at the polls. And then if you also look at the violence, in my own findings, you find it difficult to differentiate between 6 and half a dozen. And because oftentimes it tends to appear that the men in the bush, perhaps people in positions of responsibility, have the same approach to life, have the same philosophy, and let me leave it at that.
And if there is, I mean, obviously we're not encouraging violence, or we're not telling anybody to go. I mean, we wouldn't want to see any violence. But what sort of impact do you think that might have on things like voter apathy, for example? I mean, what do you think might happen with voters, as far as you've been able to discern, and just speaking sort of generally from experience, because obviously Saturday hasn't happened yet?
Charles, if we step back a little bit to 2023 elections, build up to that, like Chima said, the build up of the violence in the southeast, that it was a precursor to the elections. And we saw the sit-at-home, issues and all that, and we saw how that impacted on the voting outcomes in the southeast in terms of numbers, those that registered versus numbers of people that came out. And then build up to this election, of course, people will first of all consider their security, their lives and livelihoods before they go out to say they want to cast any vote. Secondly, they need to have some sense of assurances that their votes will count before they even go out to vote. Because like I said earlier, the outcomes of the 2023 elections also will determine the voter appetite, voting appetite, if you like, of the voters in this particular case in Imo State, for example, and other states that we may likely talk about. So that being said, violence is a critical failure factor, if I can twist it this way, for this election in Imo State, because the security of lives is very critical.
But it's not just Imo State, of course. I mean, there's been a lot of violence in Kogi State.
Absolutely.
We had the SDP governorship candidate here. He said there have been dozens of attacks against his team. I mean, just literally a few days ago, they were attacked, and 3 policemen who were attached to him were killed. And we can see some of those police people on our screens right now. So it's a very worrying thing, isn't it?
Absolutely. And like you said, Charles, it's permeating everywhere. The Kogi situation is also, pathetic. Build up to election. One wonders how people, the right people, the innocent citizens of this country that can be able to come out with the confidence to exercise their franchise, especially also with the bric-a-brac and the accusations and counter-accusations of the involvement of security agencies, neck deep or hand deep into, collaborating with whichever, to favor whoever. Thankfully, we saw the move by the Inspector General of Police to redeploy some of these commissioners of police, but it should go beyond that, to be honest, to build that confidence. And if you flip the coin now to say, if INEC is ready, is the security situation right for people to exercise their franchise? Is a very valid point for us to note and to consider.
Yes, that's a good point. And Mr. Christian, Chima, I mean, we've heard INEC saying they'll not count results in polling units where there's violence. What do you think of that?
Well, to tell you the truth, I acknowledge the insecurity, and it's a big component of voter confidence, right? But the biggest letdown I see here is on the confidence people have on INEC as an entity. And in my own analysis, I believe that it will take INEC an upwards of 10 years to restore the confidence they so flippantly lost in 2023. And that's my own personal analysis, because you have to conduct at least 2 presidential elections to be able to convince the ordinary Nigerians that you are now ready for their
but I
votes to
mean,
count.
it can be incremental.
Yes, so
because
you take it
we've got this election
Yes,
coming up.
yes.
And INEC is trying to put in confidence-building measures. One of them is to say that if there is violence in a polling booth, a polling unit, we will not count the results in that polling unit.
It's interesting that they will say that, because in one of our studies we found out something that is called selective application of violence. And what you call selective application of violence is, if I am a candidate running for office, I should be able to know where I should, do well in terms of polls. I also would be able to determine where I will not win the elections. And in that case, I can sponsor my people to go in those opposition strongholds to cause violence. And so if you have an INEC whose template is, we will not count anywhere there is violence.
So we can go and disrupt the election
so
and then you won't count.
You're now encouraging politicians to do election.
Yeah,
That's what
it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense to me. And I said this again, that INEC has to be conscious and again, it's not just INEC now. What I've seen across Nigeria is this gradual decline in trust. And trust is a very big entity when you talk about societal cohesion. Whether you're talking about the judiciary, police, it's declining. And then when you get to that, you don't longer leave things to institutions to manage. I'll give you an instance. By 14 minutes past 1 p.m. on the presidential election, the February 25th, INEC, we are still recruiting ad hoc staff in Anambra State. And we have evidence to this. And so where you can't do the basic that we expect you to do, people have to now take an oversized interest in seeing and indeed policing INEC and other people to do their jobs. And this is where I invite Nigerians that we have to look at our laws, we have to look at participation. Gone are the days where you lay back and you expect the organizations to do their bits. Now you have to be involved in the process to make sure that even when you discover that they are not able to do their bit, that you encourage them and keep their feet to fire until they do that. Let me say this. I don't believe the people we have in positions of responsibility have the full appreciation of what people do when they vote. For instance, for a woman take any community in Mango local government of Plateau State, when they vote, they are not giving you just votes, they are giving you their lives. Because shortly after that election, herdsmen will attack. And they are looking at who do we call in the middle of the night that can save us. For the pregnant woman, they will go to the hospital and they will not find medical disposables. For the other person, you might have accident on the road and you will find emergencies. So when people vote, they are giving you their blood, they are giving you their life. And so what INEC is counting is, to me, is not mere ballots. They are counting the blood and life and sacrifices and aspirations of a nation. And then anytime you tamper with that, it's a huge, huge letdown. You take this, for instance, our parents and your generation, of course, never really recovered from 1993. And after 1993, you saw a decline in civic participation. And 2023 was another watershed moment. And I don't expect to see decline in participation of young people, but it's beginning to happen in our conversations. And what I say to that is that we'll have to keep going at it until we're able to get to that place where votes count. As of today, it's unfortunate that people have to have this kind of discussions to talk about the confidence people have in the system. Because for instance, you take the risk and present yourself at the polling units. With all the insecurity, you know you stand a great risk of being injured, being harmed, being maimed, or even being killed. And then you still take that risk to come out and vote. And then after that voting, something happens along the way. It's not a good experience, and I encourage our policymakers to look into it.
That's a very good point. And Baba Yusuf, just turning to that point about INEC saying they'll not count results in polling units where there's violence. I mean, should INEC instead not be saying they'll cancel the report, the result, and repeat the election the next day? Would that not send a better signal than what Chima was saying there, which is that according to research, once you say to someone, we won't count the ballot, the guys will say, right, marshal your troops, go to his stronghold, disrupt the election, because they won't count the vote.
To be honest, even before that step you talked about, Charles, to repeat the election, I will expect a higher sense of responsibility and demonstration of that responsibility by INEC to say they will rather request for what you call a reinforcement of security at that location.
Yeah, so that doesn't arise at all.
To show seriousness, come on.
Yeah.
This is serious business. And INEC is already working to the answer that most likely they are not going to count. So they are already, like you said, creating that scenario that Chima mentioned. I want to see an INEC that will be firm and that will now put the security agencies on the spot and say, we are ready to do our job. Come and make sure you provide that security. Before we even go to the second layer to say, okay, peradventure it doesn't work, we will continue to repeat this election in line with the provisions of the Electoral Act to be able to deliver the mandate we have been given. Not to sit down ab initio and to already go to the answer and say we will not count if there is violence. I don't think that is, with all due respect,
in fairness to INEC, though, they don't command the police.
Of course they don't. But then, like I said, putting them on the spot, telling Nigerians we are ready to do this. The security agencies should come and provide the security we need. And so long as they do that, we are ready to deliver our mandate. And if they fail to do that, we will come back and repeat that election. We will not budge. That shows responsibility, that shows commitment, and that will engender trust on Nigerians that they are ready to do their job without fear or favor.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Chima, what do you make of this declaration of a strike in Imo State by the labor unions, the NLC and the TUC?
Oh, beautiful. But before I go into that, please permit me to contribute more to the
certainly.
insecurity.
Yes.
And because if you study election day insecurity, and we've taken our time to do this, you would see, for instance, we used Lagos as our case study, and I was in Lagos all through the governorship elections, and we gathered, data, and we saw what happened. Election day insecurity has suggested that our approach to security on the election day is no longer efficient. What do I mean? When on the election day you have armed mobile policemen and military resources strategically located, that in itself, if they are not compromised, inhibits the ability of cross-border, or what you could call cross-polling units, migration of violence, of these perpetrators of violence. But what I've seen now, that you don't need an AK-47 to disrupt the election in a polling unit. All you need is 2 or 3 boys that are mobilized with anything, cordials, machetes. And when you leave 2 police officers who are unarmed, trying to manage people, trying to keep people orderly per polling unit, and then you sequester the armed guys 10, 15 minutes away from crisis response, or in some cases,
by the time they get there,
the boys are gone. So you are able to stop people from moving around, but you're not able to stop them from affecting this polling on that day. So I believe that our security people should be able to understand that these things have changed.
And these are things that repeat over and over again. So you can't say that you don't have the knowledge
that it happens, and
or the experience.
And then when you now deal with the people who are really armed on the election day, you now ask yourself, with all these impediments, even journalists have difficulties moving around. How come these people are able to move around? Because those people who are dangerously armed don't, in some cases, are not localized, right? So if they're able to move from point A to point B, what did they see on the road? Who did they meet on the road? And how were they able to have that access? So you talk about compromise, possible compromise, and then you also talk about failure and strategy. And that's that on the security. Now going to NLC about the strike in Imo State and how it might affect the outcome of the elections. I believe that a huge component of the elections, and I wrote about this in 2019, is INEC is independent, but you also see that they are largely dependent on a lot of other factors.
Yeah, of course.
For instance, sensitive materials are domiciled within the CBN. They will have to rely on Nigeria Air Force for forward and backward deployment of election materials. They will have to rely on the police for security. They will have to rely on the media for coverage. So you see that there are a whole lot of things they rely. Now that you have shut down air operations, you now put these people more at need logistically, because you have to fly either to Enugu or to Port Harcourt and then travel by road. Yeah. So you see, within that framework, it's also a problem. And that's why I think that the federal government should intervene and negotiate with NLC to immediately stop that. Or else, then we'll have to be left to the option of considering postponing Imo elections by at least 2 weeks.
What do you think, Baba Yusuf?
To be honest, it's very unfortunate. For me, it's a two-edged sword, Charles. First of all, for the action of the Labour Congress, in my opinion, leaves much to be desired. As far as I'm concerned, the objective of the Nigerian Labour Congress, if at all, from what I know from time immemorial, is the protection of the interest of the people, in particular the Labour, the union. And with due respect to what happened to Mr. Ajero and all that, I think when you want to take such actions, you have to look at the overall interest of the country. They almost crippled today, halfly, the nation's economy, innocent citizens that have nothing to do with this issue, people that may even be sympathetic to them, families that have critical emergencies, businesses that have to go on in this kind of terrible socio-economic malaise, and then you come because of this issue, decide to take down, air movements that are critical in nature. And by the way, the person or the people they are fighting will take a private jet to go anywhere unhindered. So at the end of the day, who will bear the brunt? And as always, Nigerians are always bearing the brunt of this fight between whatever elephants you want to talk about, political, elephants and whatever. So I thought the labor union should have thought it through better so that the impact will be highly minimal on the generality of the citizens of this country. We don't need to be paying these prices. Moving on to with regards to the elections, like Chima mentioned, INEC is sitting in the middle of what you call dependencies and interdependencies, whether they are logistics and all that. And at the end of the day, if this election doesn't hold, is Labour Congress, the NLC and other people are not playing into the hands of those people that are the anti-democracy, for example. And at the end of the day, if the elections don't hold on Saturday, whose ox is actually God at the end of the day? So to my mind, that should have been more well thought out, because the majority of the people that are negatively impacted are the people that shouldn't at all be impacted by this track action.
Right. Those are very good points from both of you. I want to thank you very much indeed. Baba Yusuf is a policy strategist, political commentator and group CEO of the Global Investment and Trade Company, and Chima Christian is a public policy analyst. Thank you to both of you.
Thank you for having us.
That's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja and Owerri, bye-bye and thank you for watching.